Well, hello there. Here we are again, and thanks for joining me. A rather rainy Tuesday afternoon here in Sussex. This week, as promised, I wanted to talk a little bit about some history, especially as some of us get older and moving towards the end of our careers, and there are a lot of younger people coming along for whom all this is new, of course. But this year marks the 40th year of publication for HCB. First issue appeared in January 1980. And so for the July issue, we decided to reach out to a number of other organisations and bodies who were of a similar age to get their views on how things have changed over the past 4 decades. And when you look at it, it was quite a busy time. What I like to think of as the long 70s, if you like, from around about 1968 up until 1980. HCB wasn't the only new arrival. For instance, for this issue, we heard from ILTA, the International Liquids Terminals Association in the States, which next year, in fact, will be celebrating its 50th anniversary. I think that's right. It's 40 this year. The National Association of Chemical Distributors in the States will be 50 next year. We heard also from the TT Club, which is a little older than the rest of them. Insurance has been around for a long time. We heard from Exis Technologies, which in fact grew out of some difficulties and opportunities from new technology back in the 80s within HCB, in fact, originally. We also heard from SECO, of course, whose boss, Jim Sherwood, passed away recently. And SECO was one of the first big container leasing companies to move into tanks. And I was pondering, I thought, well, there was an awful lot going on then. How come? What was the cause for that? And of course, I think you have to go back a bit further. Certainly in the late 50s, for instance, when the UN model regulations and that system of regulating dangerous goods in transport arrived. And in response to that, a Hamburg-based publisher, Stork Verlag, established a magazine, Gefährliche Ladung, which is still going today, to provide the German chemical industry with information on rule changes and so on. In the 70s, it became apparent to them that they could do an awful lot better if they had an English language version as well, because that would broaden their potential readership. And Stork Verlag were instrumental in establishing HCB in the late 70s, as I said, and it came to fruition in January 1980. It's a shame, really, that we don't still have Herbert Kennard with us. He died earlier this year, and he had, up until the end of 1979, worked for the Department for Transport as a rapporteur for the Geneva meetings. And of course, being a civil servant, had to retire at 60 and so started writing for HCB, I think in the February 1980 issue, and pretty much every issue after that. But it wasn't just the arrival of regulations, it was also the spread and expansion of the global petrochemical and oil industry, which brought with it some mistakes. And those mistakes, of course, led to some major disasters. I think in the UK, the one that really changed things was the Flixborough explosion in 1974. But there were similar events elsewhere in the world. And if you look at the regulatory bodies themselves, for instance, or the enforcement agencies, at least the UK Health and Safety Executive was founded in 1974 along with the Health and Safety at Work Act. I think OSHA in the States was a little earlier, and the US Environmental Protection Agency came along. There were similar moves in other industrial countries. And industries, especially those dealing with the high hazard operations, felt they had to respond to this by having a presence and having some input into the way that regulations were made and enforcement were carried out, and establishing standards. And so associations like ILTA, NACD, and all the rest who date back from then were set up. And it forced their members, I think, to think a little more seriously and carefully about how they carried out their business. I mean, that process continued, of course, well into the 80s, where another decade of major accidents, particularly at sea, finishing off with the Exxon Valdez, which led to the OPA 90 in the States. But chemical industry, of course, had by then started to move things along itself, and following the Mississauga accident in Ontario in, it was 88, was it? Established responsible care, and that led to SQAS and all the other things that you are familiar with these days. And so it goes on, and I think as SQAS in particular shows the way things have changed. It was to do with safety and quality to start with, and that's extended to environmental protection, to corporate social responsibility, and most recently sustainability. And those sort of considerations were not part of the business environment 40 years ago. That long 70s, of course, was also a decade of a great deal of change socially. It came on the back of the 60s, a decade of complaint and protest, the civil rights movement in the States and the protests against the Vietnam War, when, let's not forget, students were being shot dead on campuses in the States. The 68 riots in France and so on. But after that, I think the 70s were, for a lot of us who came of age in that decade, were a time of enormous opportunity and potential. And stage clothes, yes, but that was partly to do with the chemical industry, which was coming up with these new fabrics and new dyes. It was a colourful decade for those of you who weren't there. And a lot of new music that we'd never heard before and had never been heard by anybody. Some of it was terrible looking back, but a lot of it still sounds pretty good to me. And later on, of course, we were also part of the origins of business and home computing. Those who are perhaps a little younger than me might remember getting their first, what they call Acorn computers and so on. And a lot of those people are the ones who've developed the systems and software architecture that will be the basis of things going forward. I will probably return to that next week, because I had an interesting email just today, actually, from Roger Kagan, which I want to address in some detail, along with some other topics that emerged as a result of the COVID lockdown, which is still here. It's stricter in certain places. And I just had a note to say that the Chemical Facilities Anti-Terrorism standards have been reauthorised in the States. Well, good job that. Sometimes the regulators do respond to industry input. That's it for me for this week. I hope you stay well, and I hope the sun's shining next week when I do this. I look forward to seeing you then. Bye for now.